this is Peter at Retrofret in Brooklyn, New York. And a lot of folks are confused about why there's so many different types and sizes of 4-string banjos. So I'll give you a little historical explanation for that. Sometimes it gets a little confusing, but basically they come from this size, which is a banjo ukulele, all the way up to a plectrum banjo, which is a very long neck instrument. They basically start out with the old 5-string banjo. And about 100 years ago, around 1910, this was the only kind of banjo that existed. And it has this little 5th string on it. There's a 5th string right there. This isn't actually fretted. So it's a drone note, and it clashes with a lot of what you're going to be playing. It was really inconvenient to have that 5th string wanging away out of key, especially because horn players like to play in some funky keys. So what the first thing that occurred to a lot of banjo makers was you could take the 5th string off the banjo completely and only have the 4 play strings. If you take that 5th string off the banjo and only have the 4 playing strings, then you have a banjo that instead of playing with your fingers, you can play with a pick, which they called a plectrum about 100 years ago. And this makes it much easier to play in jazz players' keys. That will be the longest neck version of a 4-string banjo that you'll see. Now at the same time, mandolin and violin players started to get into playing the banjo because the banjo was getting popular in dance bands about 100 years ago. And what they wanted was a short neck 4-string banjo that was played basically like a violin or a mandolin. So it's tuned in fifths, actually like a viola, just to confuse everybody. And this is what became the tenor banjo. So this is a tenor banjo from about 1918. It's what's called a short neck tenor. You see the neck isn't much longer than my forearm here. Basically, this is the original form of the tenor banjo, and it was used in dance bands and to play ragtime. But this is a pretty archaic instrument, so you don't see that many of these still. This one was made about 1918, 1919. What the players at orchestras discovered is that if you made the neck longer, if you're playing in a dance band or orchestra, what you really need is a banjo that can cut through, because you've got 5 saxophone players sitting over here and 3 trombone players sitting over here. So they made the neck longer, but they kept that violin viola tuning. So this is a long neck tenor banjo. And this is the kind of thing you start to see in the early 1920s. And a good one of these, like this Vega, is about the loudest fretted instrument you'll ever hear. And you can hear this even if you have horn players all around you and a whole violin section over there. This will still hold down the rhythm. So this is basically an open back tenor banjo with an orchestra scale. The next thing that happens is this is a full orchestra tenor banjo. This is the kind of thing they started to develop about 1923, 24. What this is the long neck tenor banjo. It's loud, but it's not quite loud enough. So they take that instrument and develop what's called a resonator, which is a big wooden contraption. Usually this is either carved or pressed wood that fits over the back and is usually mounted with what's called a flange. That's this metal piece that runs around the edge. And what that's meant to do is take all the sound that the banjo is sticking down into your belly, where it gets absorbed by your snappy suit, and throwing it back out towards the audience. So this is what's called an orchestra tenor, or most people now would just call it a resonator tenor banjo. Essentially, you're playing the rhythm and you're pushing the whole band along. And a lot of them are very, very fancy, because people in that era had money for entertainment, and there were really no records and radio were still only for home use. So if you wanted to go out and dance, something like this was providing the beat for your dancing. But they're still fairly popular today at jazz bands or solo instruments. But there's one other variation, and that's the ukulele banjo. Because back in that era, the ukulele was the single most popular instrument of the day. Everybody in college went away and they had to take a ukulele with them, or so the legend says. So what the banjo makers did is they wanted to get in on the action. So they took a ukulele neck and scale, put it on a tiny little banjo rim, and you got something like this. And all these instruments will give you more punch than you could possibly use in most modern bands. But they all come from an era when you had to be loud, you had horn players sitting around you, and basically it's really hard to play sad music on any of these. So they're out to have fun with. So everyone out there, find a mandolin banjo, ukulele banjo. If you're really ambitious, a plectrum banjo, and go for it.